Thank you. So, last night I talked about working with the hindrances and how very much the development of samatha, deepening in samatha, involves working with that which is difficult, working with the hindrances, finding a skillful response to all of that. So tonight and tomorrow night I want to explore a little bit more how samatha develops, how we can develop it in that whole path. So right away there's this word samatha, and I translating it mostly as calmness or tranquility. I think that's the correct translation. There's a similar word called samadhi, S-A-M-A-D-H-I, and that gets both these words, very similar concepts, sometimes get translated as something like concentration. And that's the typical word we use. I want to concentrate. To me, it's not such a, it's not the most helpful word, because it tends to suggest one of two things. One, to me, it suggests something like concentrated laundry detergent or something. A lot of stuff in a very small area, kind of packed very densely. And we can tend to think of concentration that way, as a kind of microscopic narrowing down of the attention. And some meditation traditions in Buddha Dharma, some meditation traditions really talk about concentration that way. It's a refining of the sort of microscope of attention. But I think these words samatha and samadhi, which usually get translated as concentration, actually means something broader than that, and something a little different, or actually quite a lot different. What it means really to me is a kind of calmness, certainly, a collectedness of mind, a kind of unification of the mind and the body and the consciousness. Perhaps depth of meditation. Depth of meditation is a very good way of putting it. There's a deepening of the meditation. Another possible thing that we, idea, quality that we think of when we hear the word concentration is just sticking on one object. And certainly that can be part of what samatha and samadhi means, just staying, in our case, in this retreat, with the breath. But it could be anything, it could be the body sensations or the metta or whatever. And that's a part of what samatha is, a part of it. But again, samatha is something much broader. It's certainly a kind of stability of mind through staying with one thing, but it involves something much more, a kind of real sense of well-being, calmness, depth, brightness, energizing. When we go into it and what it means for us in our life and what it means experientially, in the long kind of picture, there's a whole range of states of that deepening. So it can just deepen, and the Buddha actually kind of classified a number of very discrete states, noticeable states. But we can also, and that's very helpful, and tomorrow I'm going to go into that a little bit, but we can also just think about it as a continuum. So we're just deepening. We don't need to kind of classify it in any way, measure it in any way. It's just a deepening into calmness. And this development of samatha is really, I mean, maybe just from a couple of days here, you can get a sense how it could be a lifelong exploration. There's so much to this. There's such a richness to it, such an art to it. In a way, it really is a lifelong dedication to exploring the depths of consciousness, the possibilities of consciousness. As samatha deepens, there's also an expanding of the perception, the usual perceptions that we have in life, the everyday normal perceptions which you take so much for granted, and I'll go into this much more tomorrow. As it deepens, they begin to get questioned. And so this lifelong exploration is not only into the depths and possibility of consciousness, it's also into the whole question of reality and perception. And with all that comes a profound rest to the body, to the being, to the heart, to the mind. Immensely valuable. Through that comes an availability to ourselves, to life, to others. What I might call receptivity is also a factor that is in a way awakened and opened as the samatha deepens. Just a sense of being in life in a more open way, open to receive the wonder, the mystery, the beauty of life at deeper and deeper levels. This is really, really precious in our practice. And in general, a whole range of fresh discoveries and perceptions that come out of this, out of the deepening of samatha. So, to be a human being is an amazing thing. It's absolutely incredible. We have this capacity to develop skills more than any other, certainly, creature on earth. We have the capacity to develop skills over an enormous range. This is the kind of skills that a human being can develop. And it's quite amazing if one just reflects for a second. Some of them are absolutely beautiful, wondrous skills of a dancer or an athlete, a footballer or a musician. Incredible, beautiful. And some are just not helpful, and some are just a bit weird. So, I don't know, when you were a kid, did you, or maybe you still do, you could pile coins up on your elbow. Have you ever done this? And then you do this and you catch them? You can get really skillful at this. If you look in the Guinness Book of Records, I think the record for how many coins is something like 134 or something ridiculous, 10p pieces there. And you have to think this person must have huge hands, but amazing, but kind of, so what? What do we have at the end of that? We have in our life a limited amount of time. Our time is short and limited, and we have a limited amount of energy. What are we going to develop as a skill? What are we going to invest in our life? This is a really important question. What is worth developing and worth investing in? And we can invest in and develop all kinds of things. So, to learn the skill gradually over our lifetime of collecting the awareness, gathering the energy, stilling the mind, that brightness, that depth, that opening, this is really a skill worth developing. Really, really. And it's interesting how easy it is to underestimate the power and the significance of that. I've touched on this repeatedly, but it's still quite interesting to me how much I feel like I still need to say it, even though it was a summit retreat and I assumed everyone would kind of be up for it. But repeatedly, as I've said many times, this is a pleasure I will allow myself. This is a pleasure to be pursued, to be developed, to be cultivated, not to be feared. And so we think of the path and we think of insight meditation, but as I said, there's a number of paths which the Buddha laid out. Insight meditation is certainly one of them, leading to liberation. The practice of loving kindness and compassion in the Brahma Vihara is also a path leading to full liberation. It hasn't got the same kind of airplay yet. Also, the third path that the Buddha outlined is samatha, leading to complete liberation. Not something that is, as I say, in the consciousness much as in the Dharma in the West yet. And so there is that leading to the inside, and also, as I said, this sense of well-being, of healing, of the quality of life, a sense of awe and wonder coming in very much, aliveness. And so we're talking a lot about the sitting practice and working with the breath, and very much that's the technique that I'm trying to get you established on a little bit. We're also talking about the walking, so there can be samatha in the walking, or a collectedness in the walking, or a presence there, steadiness of presence. We might be walking up and down on the walking path, and a car drives up the drive or leaves Gaia House or whatever, and the attention just, who's that? Who's coming? What is it? What's going on? And sometimes without realizing it, we're just there. And we say, well, so if I look? So what if I look up? What difference does it make? And of course, ultimately speaking, it doesn't make any difference. Who cares? I don't care. It doesn't really make any difference. But we may be missing out on the deeper kind of treasures, and not developing the samatha. There's also an aspect that, how to put it, if, for example, we're sitting and there's an itch going on, and the impulse is just to scratch it. What's going on? One just scratches the itch, and doesn't, the mind is just moving to what's calling it, moving to where it seems to need the attention. Being pulled, basically, usually by greed or aversion. And it's being pulled in impulsive reactivity. And again, of course it doesn't matter if we scratch an itch. It's not really the end of the world. But scratching an itch impulsively, reactively, is a kind of microcosm of a bigger kind of impulsive reactivity, which in our lives and on a global scale is not that different from what happens when nations are a little bit puffing their chest up, what we've got going on with Iran and the hostages and all that. It's just the kind of, the ego is kind of like an itch, and we need to pump it up. We're reacting to someone saying or not saying or something to our ego. It's the same movement of impulsive reactivity. So through the samatha, we're learning actually not to be so pulled. Starts with small things, itches, pains, whatever, and eventually it becomes this genuine non-reactivity in life. So how much of the world's misery, how much of the conflict, the pain that human beings cause each other is actually down to this, that kind of impulsive reactivity? Whether it's anger or someone putting someone else down and then needing to react, whatever it is. So this development of samatha has many benefits. I'll touch on them tonight and tomorrow. Another one is a kind of what I might call, it's a strange word in a dharma sort of setting, but personal power, in the sense of how often have we been in a situation, a relationship or a difficult situation with another, and we feel like we're not actually able to stay with our truth and stay steady and say what we need or communicate our truth or whatever it is. The being is too shaky, too flimsy. There's a way that strength comes into the being, power, not as power over, but just as power in oneself, that comes into the being through the samatha practice. One of the ways it comes into the being. And certainly anyone who's tried to or been involved in a creative project that takes a long time, if you write a novel or write a symphony or something that really takes a steadiness of effort, the samatha is hugely important for that, just showing up over and over. This samatha, what we're doing here, has a way of working into the being and giving it a kind of steadiness of showing up. One just shows up every day at whatever it is, the creative project, whether it's artistic or otherwise. Similarly with service. How easy it is to waver when we're involved in service work. because there isn't quite that strength and that steadiness. And of course, samatha has huge implications for insight, massive implications for insight. If you've done some insight meditation, how common it is for, maybe everyone who's done insight meditation knows this. You're on retreat, you see something, yeah, I understand impermanence, I really see it. Or I really see this pattern, this particular psychological pattern that I get into, I really see that, I really understand it. And then the end of the retreat comes and we leave Gaia House, and very soon it's just crumbled, it's just gone. Where's it gone? Why didn't it stay? How common this is. There's something about samatha that, to use Jesus' analogy, the seeds of insight are landing on fertile ground, and they can go deep and really take root. So when we see something in an insight way, it's actually making a difference in a way that lasts in our life, in a way that's not fragile. Is also, as I said, the prime kind of soil for us to have insights in the first place. A mind that's deeply calm, deeply receptive, open, malleable, bright, tender, sensitive. This is the kind of mind that has insight very, very easily, very, very intuitively and quickly, and not just on the mental level. So insights come and they really stick. And we could say, on one level, we hear a lot of talk, or hopefully we hear a lot of talk in Dharma circles about this idea of non-self, anatta, this no-self business, and emptiness and stuff. It can be very, very hard to understand that without some kind of more deep samatha. Very, very difficult. What's happening when the mind is quietening down, calming in samadhi, in a way, the gross levels, the gross activities of the ego and the self are getting quieter. It's just like putting them to sleep a little bit and experiencing this moment, this life, without that hyper activity, that frenetic activity of the self, without such a built-up self. So in a way, the samatha itself is giving us a taste of what it is to have the self be less and less prominent, less and less active. And similarly, have the world and the world of experience and separation and this and that be less and less prominent, less and less active. I'll talk about this tomorrow night, but there's a real link between the samatha deepening and very deep insights into emptiness deepening. As I pointed out at some point, first thing that usually happens when we sit down to meditate and say, okay, calmness, great, I want some of that, is we notice that's not what the mind does. It's not calm. There's a lot of agitation, there's a lot of thinking, tomorrow, yesterday, this and that. In a way, as I said at some point, we have lifetime habits of inattention, lifetime habits of not being present, of not being collected. Slowly, slowly in this practice, it's a very gradual practice, and the most basic level, just the steadiness that's expressed by just showing up to the sittings, the commitment, just that is giving a steadiness to the heart and the mind. Just that much. Just showing up, just being here, just putting in some effort. At the most basic level. It's not insignificant. That steadiness kind of, again, works its way into the being and brings a kind of strength with it. Just from showing up. Anyone who's trying to live in an honest way, in an open way, certainly anyone who's walking the path, knows that it's not easy. We are absolutely challenged on this path, challenged to live with openness and integrity. And we need every bit of strength that we can get. Strength that's pliable, not a rigid or brittle strength, but a strength that's open and, in a way, tender too. And I think we often don't realize the significance of that and how much we need it. So oftentimes, in insight practice, etc., we hear, let go, just let go, don't be attached, etc. And, wonderful. But we find it's actually very difficult to let go. It's very difficult to let go. How much we are aided in letting go by a sense of well-being. As much well-being as there can be, that's the degree to which the letting go is aided and enabled. When we feel like there's some sense of inner resource, it's much easier to let go of things, inner and outer, much, much easier. And I see this over and over and over with people. And oftentimes people have been decades of meditation, very, very little emphasis on cultivation. Most of the emphasis on just being in the present moment. And there's just patterns that just repeat for years and years and years. Not enough leverage from the inner resources to let go. Not enough sense of okayness from which we can let go. And so I'm actually not going to go into talking a lot about technique on this retreat, so I'm actually not going to say much more about how in technical terms, how it develops, because we're giving a lot of information about that. When the Buddha was asked, okay, what is it that helps, what's the most significant help for concentration, for samadhi, for samatha? Didn't blink, and he said, happiness. Happiness is what's called the proximate cause. It's the thing that most supports a sense of samatha deepening, of calmness deepening. Which at first you think, oh, that's strange. Happiness is certainly the fruit of samatha, and a little while ago, I can't remember when it was, a few weeks ago, was reading this article in the newspaper, and they'd just done a series of tests measuring sort of electrical output in the brain with meditators and non-meditators. And they found a significant difference between the meditators and the non-meditators. And finally, I think it was the left prefrontal cortex, which is associated with positive emotion, gets a lot of stimulation of its activity in an ongoing way. And the right prefrontal cortex, which I think is negative kind of emotions, gets subdued. They also found, interestingly, that at about 10,000 hours of meditation, there's quite a dramatic sort of quantum leap. So I say this to encourage you. Me and one of the managers a little while ago, we did a little bit of arithmetic. 10,000 hours is quite a lot. So you're certainly not going to get up to that on this retreat. But to bear in mind, there's some dramatic kind of shift that happens. I don't know. Of course, people of practice have known this for yonks. I mean, it goes back to the Buddha and before that, in fact. But it's also something that a person of practice, a person dedicated to exploring this, no question about it. I read that article and it was like, it was nothing at all surprising in it. I didn't know about this right-left thing, but it's very clear to a person who dedicates themselves to practice in this way. But then, so happiness is the fruit, certainly, but the Buddha is saying happiness is also the basis, and this is why I said right in the opening talk, and keep repeating it, look for, nurture, encourage a sense of appreciation when you're here. It really will feed the mind calming, settling down, deepening. It will feed that sense of happiness. And actually any practice you do, any meditative practice you do, needs that support. Some sense of well-being on which to rest. And so we need to think about gratitude, appreciation, looking around us and taking in what's beautiful, what's wonderful, what touches us. It can be, as I said, appreciation for what's here, what the managers give us, the wonderful work they do. Can be a gratitude in one's life in general. Can be love of the teachings for some people. Just love being in a Dharma environment, love hearing the teachings and practicing. Nature, as I keep saying, opening to nature, taking that in. Hugely significant. Love of simplicity, or feeling nourished by the simplicity. General kind of receptivity. So again, receptivity as a fruit, but receptivity as a base, including the sense of connection with others here, practicing together. So going back to what we're talking about, eye contact, should we or shouldn't we? Is it a good idea or not? For some people it will just be distracting. For others it's extremely nourishing. It brings a sense of connection. We want the juices to flow in the heart. The more there is that appreciation, that gratitude, that sense of loveliness, of connection, the more the samatha can deepen, and the deeper the freedom that's accessible. So, as I've touched on several times as well, we seem to have this, in a way, magnet towards what's difficult. And part of what samatha is doing, part of the way the happiness comes in, is we're retraining that obsession with what's difficult and just taking the mind, okay, this is difficult, I'm just going to find something okay or pleasant or just comfortable. Just keep the mind there as much as possible as a way of nourishing and healing. Don't always have to be pulled into the problem. And this is really a habit, and habits are things to be retrained. They can be retrained. So usually, as I say, we're either pulled into what's difficult or we're fleeing it in some unskillful way. Refrigerator, TV, beer, whatever it is. So, again, feeding this kind of the nourishment of well-being. We are here together as a community of practitioners. We're a community practicing together. So it can be that we come to Gaia House and I want my peace and quiet, I want to get some samatha, I want to get some concentration. And not seeing this bigger picture of us all practicing together. How precious and how beautiful that is. If I'm too much into my calm, my quiet, don't bother me, I will strangle the life out of certainly the happiness, certainly the sense of well-being, and certainly the samatha. I just squeeze the life and the joy and the juice out of it. Sometimes it's worth just reflecting if the other people here, who, when we're in a moment of aversion, can seem very troublesome and wish they'd all kind of go away or just be quiet or somewhere else and leave me to it, reflecting that if they weren't here, I wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here, there would be no retreats, there would be no Gaia House. So just a little bit of reflecting on what a necessary coming together this all is. Okay, so in time, gradually, this samatha, this samadhi begins to deepen. And it doesn't deepen in a linear way. There's no such thing as someone kind of descending this smooth and well-oiled slope into the depths of sort of bliss and luminosity, etc. And if someone comes into an interview and they report that, I'm highly skeptical of their experience and what they're saying. So, as I was talking about last night, learning to expect the waves, very much learning to expect the ups and downs. It's part of the deepening process. Learning to accept the fact of the hindrances being there, learning to work with them, learning sometimes just to see them out, just to ride them out. So, and I've said this twice now, I'll say it again, with the hindrances, not to be, as much as possible, not to be taken for the ride, into the story, into the proliferation of all that, it's about this and I need to do this and that and this needs to happen or this doesn't need to happen. Can we just see it for what it is, the energy, and almost just feel it as an energy in the body, perhaps, an uncomfortable energy. As much as possible out of the story, as much as possible too out of the self-evaluation that it means it's all gone wrong, I can't meditate, I'm useless, I'm a failure. Just recognizing, not taking it personally, bringing some kindness into the practice, some kindness in relation to all of this. What happens when that non-involvement in the hindrances is accessible more and more? We begin to see and to learn and to be able that we don't always need to give a significance or a reality or a kind of solidity to something that's going on, to concepts or to things. Even if there are things that seem kind of helpful on a psychological level. So something, someone was saying to me the other day, not on this retreat, I don't know who I am, and I don't know myself, and I'm not manifesting as an adult yet, and a whole range of kind of psychological ideas about where she was or where she wasn't. Some of that may be extremely valuable at times, to talk in terms of self and growing up and what we're manifesting in the world. Are we able to put all that down? Are we able to just say, actually I don't have to look at what's going on right now like that. I don't have to get involved in that whole swirl of concepts about that, even if it seems psychologically valuable. Do I have a choice? Do I have a choice? So that I can pick it up and it can be useful. I can work on that level and find some healing and some growth and some transformation on that level, and I can also just put it down. Because that, even those kind of concepts, they can be helpful, but they can also just be leading to suffering, to dukkha, to entanglement. So like I said yesterday at the end of the talk, that side of the samatha, just letting go of the hindrances, is the kind of unsexy side. It's not particularly glamorous, but huge in the kind of relief and space it brings into the being. When we come to a practice of collecting the mind, of samadhi or whatever, it's very common either before a person even starts or during the course of it to have some objections and feel like, I don't know about this, I'm really not sure. And to have, there's about 5 that are very, very common, and I want to go through them and kind of explore them a little bit. Reasons why it seems like this is not such a good idea, and maybe I should just go to a kind of open practice and be with what is in the present moment. So they are the tightness that can come into a practice like this. That's the first one. The second one, the relationship with goals and goal orientation, the possibility of striving. Second one, a third one, the possibility of attachment. We can get attached to any kind of pleasure or calmness. The fourth one, the possibility that actually just paying attention to one thing and developing pleasure and enjoyment in that, we may be actually suppressing some other emotion or some difficult emotion that we need to feel. And the fifth one, how on earth could it be possible that enjoying myself in meditation could possibly be good for me? Okay, so let's take these in order. The tightness. Sometimes a person will feel like I'm keep trying to work with the breath, and we work with the different kinds of breath and lengthening the breath and finding a nice breath, or just staying with one object can feel a bit cramped, as if the whole thing's becoming a bit cramped. If if then the person gives up and says, right, I'll just go to an open practice, I'll just be with whatever arises, what will happen at that point is, that was a relief. And that will feel like, okay, this is obviously the better thing to do, is to just not do that, and just let go of what feels like a contraction around being with one thing. But maybe that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Is it possible, and it's not necessarily easy, but it's part of the art, part of the skill that's developed here, is it possible to learn to practice this way with the samatha? Learn to deepen the calmness and not get too tight around it, or not perhaps get very tight at all. If we talk about samatha, samadhi as qualities of being, it has softness in it. It's not rigid, it's not brittle, it's not tight. It has a quality of a real tenderness, softness in it. So like I said at some point today, can there be a slightly bigger sense to the awareness, almost a backdrop sense? So the breath and the breath energy, the energy in the body are foremost. In the background, one's aware of the whole body and what's the relationship with the practice. Am I getting too tight? I can notice that tightness come into the body, so actually feel it as a physical contraction, and then just relax it. Just relax that tightness. So this sensitive, the Buddha says, sensitive to the whole body for a number of reasons. One of them is that we will pick up, one of them is obviously the pleasure that we're getting from the breath energy. The other one is that we'll pick up on this kind of, when am I getting too tight in relation to the practice? And it will be reflected in the subtle body sense, and we can respond to that. So we can feel that tightness and just relax it physically. It's something we can keep a kind of, keep in the background of the awareness and just keep responding to it. It's part of the practice, it's not something extra. If one comes to samatha and comes to practice like this and says, no, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to meditate, and grits the teeth and rolls out the sleeves and again, squeeze the life out of it, squeeze the living daylights out of it. It's not going to work. There has to be, as much as possible from the beginning, a responsiveness to the quality of the presence or absence of that softness in the practice. And again, as I've said, an atmosphere of kindness, just as much as possible. It's not easy, I know, sometimes. But encouraging a climate of kindness within which all this deepens. So that's another factor that we want to check alongside the tightness. What's my relationship with myself doing this practice? Am I getting judgmental to myself? Am I putting pressure on myself? Am I getting irritated with myself? Sometimes that tightness is just there, and one just has to accept the fact that there's tightness, and that's enough, and it will ease. If we get too tight in the practice, what can happen is we're actually stimulating this restless mind. I talked about this yesterday as well. It's like an analogy I use sometimes is a half-peeled banana skin, and the mind is half-peeled banana, and the mind is sort of the banana, and we're too tight with it, and the banana just shoots off like that. It will actually, the tightness will actually increase the amount of thinking that's going on, and the amount of following of thought. So this business with tightness and effort and how much, a very, very delicate question, very, very subtle, and it just gets deeper and deeper, or more and more subtle actually, the deeper we go into the samatha practice. So there's the tightness. There's the objection of goal orientation. This is huge for people. This is huge, this one. And in a way, I think it's a very large question, perhaps in the Dharma as a whole. And it is curious where we are as a sort of whole Dharma community in the West on this question of goals and striving, and are we trying to get anything or not out of practice, and does it have a goal, and all that. Bringing a kind of real, as much as possible, an intelligence and a sort of integrity of questioning to this. So, it seems to me goals are a part of life. They're just all the time in life? Can we learn to be with goals in a way that feels okay? Can we, rather than throwing all the goals out, can we actually learn to be and relate to goals and move towards goals and aspirations in a way that feels okay? At 12:30 every day, the lunch bell goes. And then it's pretty much everyone's goal to get up and go to the lunch hall. Where's the problem in that? And then the food's on the plate, and the goal is to get it onto the fork or the spoon and into the mouth. Not necessarily a problem. Or certainly if you're involved in a friendship or a relationship long term, one's kind of working with something and towards something, both. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. There's a sense of direction, aspiration there, responsiveness. So sometimes we just want to say about practice, we shouldn't have goals, that's not spiritual or whatever. And again, to really question this. Am I saying that? Am I saying we shouldn't have goals? Is one saying that? What it's really about is the pain of the self, and a lack of self-esteem, or a lack of feeling of self-worth, or self-doubt, or whatever. And when there's a goal set up, what happens? The I, the self, feels itself in relationship to that in a negative way, in a lower way, and the weight of that and the pain of that. How much is that coming into our whole view of goals itself? Because if it is, it's actually a distortion. It's very understandable and common. It's actually a distortion of the whole, in a way, fact of things. And it's difficult, it can be difficult to work with this, but can there be perhaps an appreciation for what is there in the practice? So sometimes, in the interviews you hear someone's got such and such an experience, and it's not where we are, or I say something, whatever. Can we keep with an appreciation of what we do have? Some sense of peace, some sense of well-being, some sense of pleasure and enjoyment, versus what we don't have. Sometimes the objection to goals is more from the kind of almost philosophy of non-duality. It's like, well, if you set up a goal, you're really setting up a duality. Then you set up a duality, you've got this goal, and then you're in duality, and when you're in duality, it's a problem. And there's some truth to that, but again, really not throwing the intelligence and the kind of integrity of questioning out on this one. To really understand non-duality at a deep level means, there's no goal, but there's also no how I am, no how it is. So usually what happens, a person says, I'm into non-duality, I'm just into being with what is, or just how it is in the present moment, not setting up a goal because that's dualistic. More authentic and deeper understanding non-duality, no goal, no how it is, both are empty. There's not even that reference point of how it is in the moment. That may sound completely abstract, and partly the reason is we don't have enough samatha to actually understand it. Paradoxically, seemingly, the development of concentration, the development of this depth of meditation is actually what enables us to understand a real, authentic, deep sense of non-duality in a very real way, rather than just as a concept that gives reality to how things seem now, which is not the reality. So there's the tightness, there's the goal orientation or the striving. Third possible objection is this question of attachment, and I'll touch on this tomorrow as well. Samatha does not lead to attachment. It really doesn't. I'd say most of the time it doesn't, put it that way. This is my experience from myself and through other people, many people I've worked with. And it's interesting, we can make a fuss about being attached to, say, pleasure and enjoyment or comfort in meditation or calmness, but we barely blink when there's attachment to wanting to live in a nice house, or this or that, or a role, or a nice food, or whatever, somehow that's okay, and we don't really challenge that. When it comes to someone's, hearing, well, maybe it's good to develop some enjoyment in the meditation. It's like, well, hold on. That's what I'm saying about the integrity of the questioning and the intelligence of the questioning. Can that be there? So oftentimes I say to people when I'm working on samatha, it's almost like, it's very curious, we need a sort of flashing neon light in our minds. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. We can really trust that this is okay. This is the fifth one. I'll talk about this tomorrow. It really does lead to a sense of, to all kinds of fruits, which I've already mentioned some, and I'll say more tomorrow. More than one of my teachers would tell me, get attached, Rob. And at first it was like, I was so surprised, like, really? I didn't quite believe it. But one can get attached, because what happens is one gets attached to a certain level of samatha, and then the whole meditation matures, deepens to another level. And that first level seems, actually, I've got attached to something else. It ripens, and we let go of a stage where we were attached before, and then we let go, and it moves on and on and on. And possibility to the end of all attachment. Absolutely. So slowly and gradually, and as I said, in a very non-linear way, absolutely non-linear way, over time, and this is a very short time, this retreat, but over time in our lives, we do begin to be less enticed by the sort of usual stuff that we're caught up in. The usual swirl of thought and emotion and this and that and obsession about the future and past. And so slowly it just begins to lose its appeal. And we begin, almost like an acquired taste, to acquire the taste of calmness, of that depth of well-being. And it really is an acquired taste for some people. It really is something they need to acclimatize themselves to. But soon, or in time, it can be like a thought begins and we're in practice and we don't even feel it's necessary to finish that thought. How interesting could it be anyway? It's just a thought. Most thoughts are, you've had them about 10,000 times before. It's very rarely creative, very rarely that helpful even. Better just, whatever. Just let it go. And one develops that capacity. It's just lost its pull. It's just a thought. It's just nothing is there at the end of that thought. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of thought. Absolutely not. But one knows, keeping with the steadiness, with the energy in the body and the well-being. Absolutely. So, for some people, talked about being open to the pleasure and open to the enjoyment, to whatever degree in the meditation, whatever degree, the comfort or enjoyment and pleasure. For some people, what happens is that energy begins to build, and either in a sudden way or in a gradual way, it kind of a little bit opens to something else, and it's called piti, P-I-T-I, which is a Pali word, language of the Buddha. P-I-T-I, usually translated as rapture, sometimes bliss, sometimes ecstasy or whatever. What it means really is any kind of pleasant feeling in the body, pleasant physical sensations arising, for our purposes now, from meditation, but actually can also come listening to music or being open in nature, can come from a lot of different things. Sometimes, this has a whole range of strength, a whole continuum. It can be very, very subtle, just some nice feeling somewhere in the body, really not that dramatic, to an absolute thunderbolt of lightning shocking through the body that's almost overwhelming in its strength, or floods of ecstasy. Can be anywhere on that continuum. In a way, in a very real way, the strength is not so important. We're not that interested in it being all that strong, necessarily. one of the reasons that that I'm working on this particular technique for this retreat, and as I said, it's really not a big deal. You don't have to do this technique in one's life. It's just something I'm presenting. Is that this energy movement in the body that we've been working with, this chi in the body, there's not a big leap between that and the pleasantness of that and the piti. So it kind of lends itself to the cultivation of this piti, of this sense of physical pleasure. So that pleasure, it can be kind of a tingling, can be waves of kind of nice feeling of bliss, or it can be a lightness, some sense of rising. Any physical pleasure at all can come in many different forms. As it can be strong or weak. Why does it come? It's a very curious thing. Sometimes it's almost like the mind is kind of rubbing against the breath, and it's causing this kind of gathering of energy by just being there with the breath. Or the mind is acting like a kind of capacitor, like an electric capacitor, storing energy, and because it's not being so distracted and losing energy going to this and that, it's actually gathering energy, and then this energy begins to manifest physically, however it does. Piti sometimes is translated as interest, so there's also an increase in interest at that point, sometimes even excitement. As I said, it doesn't always come just from meditation, certainly not always just from concentration. Can be also from a general openness of heart and openness of being. That's why when we're listening to music or in nature, sometimes for some people it comes then. Or one's just the heart is open, the channels of energy are open, and it can manifest. Because the actual condition for piti to arise is not so much concentration, staying with one object, as it is a non-entanglement with things, not so entangled in past, future, not so entangled in what's going on in the present even. We have a relationship of non-entanglement. In that non-entanglement, this nice energy can arise. So I'm aware of saying this. As I said, some people get it, some people don't, and it's, in a way it's just a matter of time. Not to grab too tightly to this. And any sense of achievement or this or that, or I haven't got it or I have got it. Can we just, in a way, hear this as one possibility? In a way, all it is the comfort that I've been talking about, the little bit of pleasure that I've been talking about, the enjoyment. It's just that building and building and building. We don't have to make too much of a thing out of it. But if it's there, if that pleasure and that enjoyment are there, and the sense of piti is there, it is something we want to encourage. We want to kind of nourish it, and it will deepen into other levels I'll talk about tomorrow. Sometimes it's the sense of settledness in the meditation, or openness, and the really pleasant energy is really quite fearful for people. There's quite a lot of fear comes up, or kind of trembling with it. If the fear is really, really strong and almost overwhelming, well, at that point you just have to stop, take a few breaths, and maybe explore the fear in a kind of insight meditation where actually be with the fear. If it's not too strong, and this is quite common, one finds oneself again in a situation where there's both a kind of pleasantness and a fear around. And if it's not too strong, without pushing the fear away, is it possible to just lean over and the awareness into what's pleasant and just enjoy it and learn that we can trust it? It's an analogy I used it in one of the groups. It's a bit like you run a hot bath and you're not quite sure how hot it is, so you put your toe in, it's okay. Then you put your foot in, that's okay. Then you put a bit more of your leg in, that's okay. Eventually, same with the piti, same with this pleasure in meditation. It's like something we can just open to and surrender to. Nothing in it at all to be afraid of. Something absolutely we can trust. But it may take time. one of the other factors that fear can come up is because as the samatha and the samadhi deepen, there can be less of, as I said before, less of this very active sense of self. We begin to lose a sense of who I am. Who am I? Someone wrote, do I need to investigate that? Not really right now. It's almost just getting used to a sense of being without such a prominent sense of self. Less sense of a doer, less sense of that. For some, that less sense of self is not very far from a kind of fear of annihilation of self. Who am I when I let go of the usual kind of thicket of thought and construct and all that I usually take myself to be? Who am I then? It's a bit like dying for some. So again, nothing to be afraid of here. It's something we can gradually get a taste for and learn that we can completely trust it. Okay, so again, a long talk. There's a lot to communicate on this retreat, so I apologize if it's long, but hang in there. Quality of deepening of samadhi, of samatha, should have love in it. Again, it's not this kind of self-enclosed, removing everything, brittle wall that we put around consciousness and just shutting everyone and the whole world out. Actually, in the tenderness of it, in the softness of it, in the openness of it, it has a quality of love in it. Sometimes even that piti, that someone was reporting today, it seems to have a love in it. Love for self, certainly, for others, for nature, for life, for everything. And this quality of receptivity, of openness to the mystery of life. It should have those qualities in it. I have come across occasionally, very occasionally, people who are able to really deepen the samatha, sometimes to extraordinary depths, and somehow they've managed to do it without that quality of love in it. And in a couple of cases, something happened. Suddenly something happened. In one case there was a health crisis, quite a strong health crisis, and the whole thing crumbled. And because it was brittle, the whole thing crumbled, and the person's practice and their insight and the whole package just went out the window. But when there's that, and speaking also from personal experience, when there's that softness there and the love as part of the samatha, there can be something like a very severe health crisis. Somehow it just sustains through it. It really carries and it works. Okay, last thing that I wanted to talk about was this fourth objection, which was, could it be that I'm suppressing something? Might it be that there's some emotion, some difficulty, some whatever it is, grief or anger or something, that I need to feel, and that just being with one object or just being with a sense of pleasure is actually suppressing that? So this question is coming out of, a real care and integrity and care. But what I would say is it's perhaps a very complex question, a very delicate question, and just maybe not to jump to conclusions about it. Not to rush and not to get into too many quick assumptions about it. For many years I was working with a model of I need to kind of be with everything that comes up because it's coming up and that's what's there and it's a kind of inner truth and I need to be with it. And then I started developing a little bit of samatha, no great depth at that point of the samatha. And I was at that time, this is when I lived in America, feeling a lot of, years ago, a lot of anger at a particular person for some things that happened in relation to me and some other people. Quite severe things, and a lot of anger kept coming up. And then one day I was at the meditation center and in the evening class meditating, some degree of samatha, nothing particularly extreme or out of this world at all, some quietness, some settledness, some sense of enjoyment, calmness there. memory came up of this person, and the beginning of the anger, and I just saw, it was almost like the anger was a seed, and it couldn't even call it anger at that point. And because of the samatha, because there was a calmness, it was very clear there was a non-building of that anger, a non-kind of drawing it out and pumping it up and injecting energy into the anger. It wasn't a suppression that was going on, it just didn't have the conditions that we usually there to build and inflate anger were just not there in that moment. So it just came up as a moment and disappeared. It's kind of a non-event. I mean, it's a sort of non-event story, but it was a real turning point for me. It was very clear that anger, what I'm calling anger, and it was really a lot of anger, doesn't exist. As I say, to be quite careful with this, but I just want to present one side of the picture, doesn't necessarily exist as a pre-packaged, ready-to-use kind of entity as anger inside. It takes conditions in the present, conditions of responding in the present to make it what we would call anger. So in a way, it's challenging a lot of the kind of views that we as sort of 21st century, psychotherapeutically informed people might have. Very delicate question. I'm not saying one thing or the other. I'm just saying maybe there's much more to this than we think, or that at first seems. It's the samatha, in a way, more than anything else, that begins to unpack some of the complexity of our emotional life, some of the richness of it, and the kind of paradoxes of it in a way. Similarly, I remember a work retreat a while ago I was working with, and she was reporting something difficult coming up and some whole constellation again of some emotion, I can't remember what it was, and also some calmness, and it would go back and forth. And I suggested, when there's the calmness, why don't you drop in a few thoughts of that difficulty and that whole mess of that, just drop in a few thoughts. So she went away and she came back. And she said, amazing, when there was a calmness, I dropped it in, nothing happened. Nothing happened. The conditions to make what seems like the issue that's necessary, that's there somehow in the psyche, in the body, waiting to come out, weren't there in the present moment to create that. So what we call our issues emotionally, psychologically, sometimes, again, very delicate here, very it's a complex issue, sometimes it's that they need the conditions in the present. And we see this very clearly going in and out of it with the samatha practice. So in Dharma language we say the issues themselves are empty. They lack inherent existence by themselves. They need something else. They need me to be reacting to them in a certain way to build them up. We probably need to see this over and over and over to really begin questioning our views around all this. So usually we think of samadhi, of depth of meditation, of samatha. We usually think of it as something where kind of, frantically trying to get together and hold this nice energy and hold this calmness and kind of build something up and hold it in place like that. We usually think of samatha as making something. It takes a lot of samatha practice to actually realize it's the opposite. What's happening as the mind deepens in meditation is that we're literally making less and less. We are fabricating and constructing less and less. I don't know how that sounds now, but it actually turns out to be one of the deepest insights, the avenue of deepest insight there is in the Dharma, into how things get built, how things get fabricated. We begin to see it through the samatha practice. And then, as I said, we have a choice at that. We then have a choice. We can use certain concepts or go into certain emotions and explore them, or we can let them go. We understand they're actually empty. I can go into it, I can use the language of self, I can work on this thing that seems to be there, or I can let it go. There's healing there's emotional healing in both of them. Both the going into and working with on the psychological level, on the level of self, and in the level of not going into, and in the level of just knowing it's empty and seeing it's empty. It's this emptiness and understanding emptiness, not just of emotions and issues, but of everything. That's where the samatha is heading. And this is something, again, that has got very little airplay in the sort of Dharma culture. There's a real relationship, I'll talk about this tomorrow, the depth of samatha and depth of really deep understanding. It's that deep understanding of emptiness that brings the deepest freedom. And that's something that's available to us. Okay, so let's sit for a bit together.